Last night, she abruptly resigned as the host of the show. And to say that I'm quite sad about it is an understatement.
Stephen A. Smith completely caught off guard by his co-host's sudden exit. Molly Qerim had been the face of First Take for over a decade, but something clearly went wrong behind the scenes. Now she secured a massive new contract outside ESPN, leaving the network's leadership outraged. So what truly went down? Let's break it apart. The shocking departure that left everyone stunned. What began as just another Monday at ESPN's Bristol headquarters quickly turned into one of the most dramatic exits in sports media history. When Molly Qerim walked out of the First Take studio on September 15th, 2025, nobody, not even her longtime co-host Stephen A. Smith, anticipated what was about to unfold. But what transpired over the following 48 hours would shake the entire sports broadcasting world and reveal the harsh truth about how ESPN treats its own stars. Picture this. It's Monday, September 15th, and Molly Qerim is doing what she's mastered for over 10 years, smoothly moderating fiery debates between Stephen A. Smith and the rotating cast of analysts on First Take. She's thriving in her element, guiding the show with that trademark calm and authority that made her vital to ESPN's signature morning program. The cameras roll, arguments fly, and everything appears business as usual. But behind those steady eyes and her bright smile, a storm was building that would flip her career upside down. After the broadcast ended, Molly packed up her belongings and walked out of that studio. Unknowingly, for the final time, she headed home, likely mulling over the dragged-out contract talks, the lowball offers, and the draining negotiations with ESPN executives who seemed to undervalue the very woman who helped turn First Take into a ratings powerhouse. Little did she realize, by the time morning came, her entire reality would change. Because late that very night, while Molly was asleep, Sports Business Journal's Austin Karp published a shocking report that shifted everything. The headline declared, "Sources, Molly Qerim leaving ESPN First Take," and instantly, what was meant to be a private dispute between Qerim and ESPN exploded into front-page news across the sport world. The report revealed that Qerim had rejected ESPN's extension due to clashing visions for her career, highlighting her wish to move forward after 10 years moderating alongside Stephen A. Smith. But here's the twist. The article implied she'd remain until year's end, giving ESPN and her audience time to absorb the bombshell. That's not what unfolded. Instead, when Molly woke up Tuesday morning to see her private negotiations blasted across every sports outlet in America, she made a bold choice that left ESPN scrambling and Stephen A. Smith blindsided on air. Rather than showing up for work, Molly jumped on Instagram and delivered her own shocker. At exactly 9 a.m. Eastern Time, she posted her story. "It is with a heavy heart that I share I'll be leaving ESPN and First Take effective immediately. Grateful doesn't begin to describe my 10 amazing years here. This show changed my life. To the fans, thank you. You for the love. To my colleagues, your family, and I'm thrilled for what's coming next. #grateful. Effective immediately. Not at year's end as the leaked article implied. Not after a farewell stretch or a final send-off. Immediately." And just like that, one of the most respected and steady figures in sports media had essentially declared, "I'm finished," then walked away from a multi-million-dollar deal. Her post racked up over 500,000 views in the first hour. Social media erupted instantly. #Molly Qerim shot to nationwide trending status, and suddenly everyone wanted answers about what had just gone down at ESPN. How does someone go from hosting a program on Monday to quitting outright on Tuesday? But the real jolt came only hours later, when First Take aired live. There sat Stephen A. Smith, alone at the familiar desk, visibly rattled as he broke the news that floored the audience.
Longtime host for ESPN's First Take, my day job, where she has been the last 10 years. Last night, she abruptly resigned as the host of the show. And to say that I'm quite sad about it is an understatement.
The word landed like a thunderclap. This wasn't a mapped-out exit. This wasn't a carefully coordinated separation. This was Molly Qerim essentially rage-quitting one of the most sought-after hosting jobs in sports broadcasting, and no one saw it coming.
Yeah, of course I do. Am I going to share it with you? No. Because again, that's her story to tell.
Stephen A.'s words were measured carefully, but his eyes betrayed frustration and disbelief. Here was a man who had shared the desk with Molly for a decade, and even he seemed floored by both the timing and manner of her walkout. ESPN's executives, equally blindsided by the early leak, scrambled behind closed doors after having planned to control the narrative closer to December. What made this more intense was the timing. This was mid-football season, when First Take's ratings peak, when debates rage hottest, and when ESPN counts on its strongest lineup. Instead, they were left with a massive void in their flagship program and zero backup plan. Ironically, ratings for that first Molly-less episode spiked 15% year over year, hitting 750,000 viewers. But it was obvious the surge was fueled by scandal and curiosity rather than content. Audiences weren't tuning in for Stephen A.'s NFL takes. They were glued to see what chaos was unfolding at ESPN. And the social media fallout? Nuclear. Within hours, hashtag Molly Qerim amassed 2.5 million impressions, with 60% of posts expressing pure shock at her abrupt announcement. Fans demanded clarity, and ESPN offered none. But here's the deeper layer. This wasn't only about one host quitting. This was a culmination of months, maybe years of behind-the-scenes tension. Contract talks had quietly started back in January 2025, with Qerim's current deal expiring at year's end. What should have been straightforward renewal negotiations spiraled into a far uglier standoff, because Molly wasn't just any moderator. She was a force who had elevated First Take from a niche debate segment into ESPN's highest-rated morning franchise, pulling in over 600,000 daily viewers. Under her watch, ratings jumped 45% from 2015 to 2024, while the show raked in more than $100 million in revenue. Million in annual ad revenue. She wasn't merely the moderator. She was a crucial engine behind the program's dominance. Yet despite all the success, despite the Emmy nomination, despite being the steady balance to Stephen A. Smith's larger-than-life persona, ESPN proposal was insulting. Consider this. She earned an estimated $500,000 yearly, while Stephen A. Smith was banking $20 million. That's a 40-to-1 pay gap. Let that sink in. ESPN's final pitch? A 4-year package worth between $700,000 and $850,000 base, with a 5% annual bump and up to $200,000 in bonuses. For an average host, maybe that sounds solid. But for the co-anchor of ESPN's crown jewel, for the woman who had driven female viewership up 30%, it was insulting. And this wasn't just about dollars. ESPN wanted Molly spread thinner, requiring 20% of her time on non-First Take projects like ESPN Plus documentaries and women's sports specials. They were diluting her influence, stretching her across side projects, while deliberately capping her value. Sources described the contract as flat-out disrespectful, not only for the money, but for signaling she was replaceable in a show she helped define. And here's the kicker. While lowballing Molly, ESPN was simultaneously handing out massive extensions to others. While lowballing Molly, ESPN was simultaneously handing out massive extensions to others. On the very day her exit hit the press, ESPN revealed a lucrative long-term deal for NBA insider Malika Andrews, fueling speculation the network had prepared for Molly's departure all along. So, when the Sports Business Journal exposed her stalled negotiations, that was the breaking point. After enduring months of low offers, dragging talks, and what seemed like a coordinated effort to undervalue her, the leak made everything public, humiliating, and irreversible.
She, Molly, put out a statement because there was a report on it, so it kind of got out of our respective controls once that happened.
That's ESPN's president of content, Burke Magnus, trying to spin the situation. You can hear the damage control in his voice. He later told The Athletic, "The Sports Business Journal story on Monday forced our hand. Discussions weren't fully aligned on roles beyond First Take, but we hoped Molly would stay in some role. She wanted a clean break, and with the leak, it was better to end things quickly than drag them out. That's corporate code for, we screwed this up badly, and now we're patching holes." The truth? ESPN never thought Molly would walk away so decisively. They assumed they could lowball her, drag her along, and eventually pressure her into their terms. They miscalculated. This was a power shift that peeled back ESPN's toxic culture. And if you believe Molly Qerim's sudden exit was only about salary, you're missing the bigger story. Because what unfolded next exposed ESPN's true internal dynamics and revealed just how toxic things have become behind closed doors. Enter Marcellus Wiley, ex-ESPN host and current podcast heavyweight, who dropped a theory so explosive it rattled the entire sports media industry. Just 5 days after Molly's dramatic walkout, Wiley uploaded a YouTube podcast that racked up 1.3 million views and completely reshaped the narrative of what really happened, what had truly gone down at ESPN. His theory? Molly Qerim didn't simply walk away. She pulled off one of the most calculated power moves in TV history. But Wiley's theory went beyond just pointing out Stephen A's reliance on her presence. He suggested she felt cornered by Smith's overwhelming influence at the network and decided to send a message too loud to be ignored.
About Stephen A. Smith as well, because remember, he's an executive producer on that show, and as he will always remind you, that's his show.
This is where it gets fascinating, because it uncovers a tangled power web that formed at ESPN around Stephen A. Smith. This wasn't just a co-host pairing. It was a setup where one individual had gained so much sway that he practically dictated the careers of those beside him. Stephen A. Smith's current contract with ESPN sits at $15 million over 5 years, plus an additional $12 million from SiriusXM, putting him near $40 million annually. And with that kind of financial clout comes influence. He wasn't merely the star on air. He was also an executive producer, which meant he had a voice in hiring, firing, and determining everyone else's value.
Just talked about that recently, about how Stephen A. Smith has that pull. Stephen A. Smith even talked about that when he checked Cam Newton recently, talking about, hey, I've hooked a lot of guys up with money.
Wiley highlighted the widely acknowledged fact that Stephen A. had lobbied for improved deals for figures like Kendrick Perkins, Dan Orlovsky, and Ryan Clark. But here's the other side. If Stephen A. didn't push for you, you stalled. And according to Wiley's theory, that's exactly the trap Molly fell into.
You can get the money if I sign off on it, or you can get what you want if I sign off on it. But the thing is,
the implications are massive. If Wiley is right, Molly wasn't just negotiating with ESPN's executives. She was indirectly needing her co-host approval for major career steps. Picture that. You spent 10 years helping transform a show into a juggernaut, yet your future hinges on whether the person beside you decides you're worthy. And evidence backs the theory. Just look at what's happened to past First Take figures. Max Kellerman, ousted in 2023, never shared the rapport with Stephen A. that others had. Shannon Sharp, who left for Fox Sports 1, clashed with ESPN's Power Dynamics 2. A pattern emerges. One star granted too much authority. But the most damning clue in Wiley's analysis? The timing of Molly's departure and what it revealed about her dynamic with Stephen A.
The thing she didn't mention was anybody by name, including Stephen A. Smith. Now, I've left the show or two before, and trust me, you're going to name some names when you leave that. Just think about Shannon Sharp when he left Undisputed. Goodness, it took about 10 minutes of all the names he dropped. That's my point. Molly didn't do that. So that lets you know already there's some friction behind the scenes.
This is pivotal. When someone exits after a decade, especially alongside a long-term partner, you expect a nod of respect, a thank you, some recognition. In Molly's Instagram farewell, she thanked her fans and called her crew family. But she never once mentioned Stephen A. Smith by name. For two people who'd worked together for 10 years, that silence was glaring, and the unease wasn't one-sided. Watch how Stephen A. delivered the news on air. While he stayed professional and voiced kind words, his tone carried stiffness, an edge that hinted this wasn't a friendly split he wanted viewers to believe.
Details, quite frankly, are none of y'all business, but it's not as if I know all the details. It was a contract negotiation that was going on.
None of y'all business. Those don't sound like the words of someone heartbroken about a close friend or colleague leaving. They sound like the words of someone on the defensive. Someone aware that there's a deeper story but refusing to open up. According to multiple insiders, the truth is that the relationship between Molly and Stephen A. had been eroding for quite some time. Production notes indicated that Smith was taking up nearly 60 to 65% of the speaking time each episode, while Molly was left with only 15 to 20%. Her role had basically been downgraded to a moderator, controlling Stephen A.'s lengthy rants. In a 2024 broadcast, Smith cut her off mid-sentence with a now viral remark. "Molly, I'm talking here." That clip racked up 500,000 views across social platforms and birthed the hashtag MollySpeak. What was meant as light-hearted banter came off very differently to fans. They saw a woman dismissed and pushed aside on her own program. But it wasn't just about screen time. Sources revealed that Stephen A. held overwhelming control over topic selections and guest lineups, frequently sidelining Molly's opinions. She wanted to contribute to shaping discussions, not just serve as a referee. Yet Stephen A.'s dominance overshadowed every element of production. Then came the personal digs. On air, Smith would comment about Molly's diet, her private matters, even bring up her 2021 divorce from ex-NBA star Jalen Rose. While some brushed it off as humor, others deemed it disrespectful and unprofessional. One insider close to Molly mentioned she often voiced unease over those remarks, believing they weakened her credibility. This tension was spiraling toward collapse. According to Waya's analysis, the leaked contract dispute merely accelerated what was already planned. By abruptly exiting and leaving Stephen A. to carry the show solo, Molly was sending an unmistakable message. First Take needed her far more than she needed First Take.
It's like, why am I sitting in a situation that I know won't get better? Think about it. You too. Beat it up in the comments. Tell me your thoughts about it. But when you know you need to do something and you know it's best for you, what you waiting for? I think Molly woke up that morning, Tuesday morning, and said, what am I waiting for?
The online response to Waya's claim was massive. The hashtag Molly's Revenge went viral, hitting more than 5,000 posts, with around 65% of fans agreeing she had long been undervalued at ESPN. Comments flooded in from viewers who had noticed exactly what Waya pointed out, how Stephen A. monopolized discussions, how Molly seemed increasingly pushed to the sidelines, and how the power imbalance was becoming undeniable. But perhaps the sharpest part of Waya's breakdown was his point about ESPN's culture as a whole. This wasn't simply about Molly and Stephen A. It reflected a system where one figure's oversized influence could shape or destroy entire careers.
I know so much about Shannon's situation, and as soon as Shannon went through that fire, he was the first one on air saying, come on, man, and talking on both sides because of the bosses, because he was in that meeting.
Waya suggested that Stephen A.'s direct access to top-level decisions gave him both knowledge and leverage other hosts lacked. He was aware of staffing changes before they became public, was consulted on key calls, and even had the authority to push for or block his colleagues' career growth. Such a structure is problematic for obvious reasons. It forces talent to seek approval from coworkers rather than focusing solely on performance. Advancement becomes tied just as much to relationships as to professional merit. And it was exactly the system that left Molly stuck. Highly skilled, essential to the show, yet unable to progress without the right advocate. The gender imbalance was impossible to ignore as well. A 2025 Sports Media Watch study showed that women in debate-style hosting roles face 30% more scrutiny, while earning 35% less than men. Molly's case was a textbook example. Despite being critical to the show's success, her salary was only a fraction of what her male co-host was paid. ESPN's reaction to Waya's theory? Full-on damage control. Burke Magnus rushed to give interviews to multiple outlets, insisting there was no controversy and that this was merely a mutual business transition. But their urgency to respond publicly suggested Waya struck a nerve. In reality, Molly Qerim's departure revealed an uncomfortable truth ESPN had long tried to bury. Their star-driven culture had become toxic, enabling one individual's dominance to undermine everyone else's contributions. Whether deliberate or not, her bold exit forced the network to confront how far their workplace environment had decayed. Then came the twist, the multi-million-dollar bidding war that flipped the narrative. Just when it seemed the Molly Qerim saga couldn't escalate further, the sports media world erupted with shocking news. Behind the scenes, while ESPN scrambled to justify her sudden exit and Stephen A. fought to contain fallout, something extraordinary was unfolding. a full-scale battle for Molly's services, laying bare how drastically ESPN had undervalued her. The first bombshell came only 4 days after her departure from an unexpected source. The U.S. Sun reported that Fox Sports had tabled a massive deal that made ESPN's offer look insulting. The package? A 3-year contract worth $2 million annually, with bonuses that could lift total pay to $2.5 to $3 million a year. To put that into context, ESPN's final offer maxed out at $850,000 annually. Fox Sports was dangling more than double that just as a baseline. For someone earning around $500,000 at ESPN, this represented a jaw-dropping 400 to 500% increase. This wasn't just about a raise. It was the kind of deal that completely reshapes your life. The Fox Sports proposal went far beyond salary numbers. It outlined a plan to make Molly Qerim a multi-sport anchor, with roles on NFL studio shows, college football previews, NCAA basketball coverage, plus her own branded podcast. Most importantly, it offered what ESPN had repeatedly denied her: full lead host status with creative authority, including veto power over her co-panelists. Think about the significance. At ESPN, Molly was sidelined a little more than a referee for Stephen A. Smith's monologues, with only 15 to 20% speaking time. Despite being just as critical to the show's success, Fox was offering her the spotlight, the chance to be the unquestioned star, shaping storylines and directing every conversation. The performance bonuses were eye-catching too, up to $500,000 tied to viewership goals, particularly for beating ESPN's First Take in prize demographics like the 18 to 49 group and women viewers. Fox wasn't simply hiring Molly. They were weaponizing her as a strategic counter to ESPN's morning dominance. But Fox Sports wasn't alone in recognizing ESPN's blunder. Soon, reports surfaced that Amazon Prime Video was exploring a potential NFL-centered debate program worth about $1.8 million annually. Meanwhile, NBC Sports was rumored to be considering her for Football Night in America or a revamped college football show, with contract estimates between $1.5 to $2 million over 2 years. What makes this bidding war so revealing is the way it shattered the narrative around Molly's worth. For years, ESPN had treated her as a replaceable moderator, someone meant only to facilitate arguments for the so-called stars. Yet the immediate high-stakes interest from powerhouse networks told an entirely different story. These weren't token offers. These were aggressive, big-money moves to land someone the industry clearly saw as a top-tier star. And the timing of these deals underscored something even more telling. What this really showed was how the industry judged ESPN's misstep. Within hours of Molly Qerim's Instagram post, talent agents and rival executives were already making calls, realizing that ESPN had just committed one of the most glaring personnel mistakes in modern sports media. But maybe the most striking part of it all was ESPN's own reaction to the news of Molly's high-profile opportunities. Instead of admitting they had mishandled things or even trying to put together a competitive counteroffer, they stuck to their line that this was a mutual evolution and that they had always respected her choice. Burke Magnus told The Athletic, "Our discussions with Molly evolved, and we respect her decision for new horizons. The tryouts ensure her first take stays dynamic. That's corporate spin for, we'll pretend this was always the plan, even though they clearly underestimated her value." The contrast couldn't have been clearer. While ESPN was auditioning replacements for someone they thought was easily replaceable, other networks were placing multi-million-dollar bets and handing her creative control over flagship programming. It was an embarrassment at a level rarely seen in corporate settings, made worse by what happened to First Take without her. While ratings initially held due to curiosity over the drama, cracks soon appeared once her steadying role was gone. With fill-ins like Ryan Clark, production logs even showed Stephen A. Smith cutting back, 10% fewer interruptions, proof that he relied on Molly's ability to rein him in. Fans weren't fooled either. Social posts like at Verstappen, with 1,500 likes, declared, "Show feels off without Molly's flow." Polls showed nearly 70% of viewers backed Qerim's decision and doubted the show could sustain itself without her. But beyond the offers and the corporate narrative, her exit shined a harsh light on the industry's gender gaps. That 2025 Sports Media Watch stat, women in debate shows make 35% less than men wasn't just abstract. It was Molly's lived truth. Look at the numbers. Stephen A. Smith earns about $20 million yearly from ESPN. If Molly got even 10% of that, around $2 million, it would have been fair given she co-hosts a show generating over $100 million in ad revenue. Instead, ESPN capped her at $850,000, expecting gratitude. The Fox Sports deal proved what insiders had whispered for years. Qerim wasn't undervalued for lack of skill, but because ESPN pigeonholed moderators as secondary. The bidding war destroyed that notion, and the chess move was clear. By making Molly the face of their lineup, Fox Sports wasn't just hiring a star, they were taking a direct swing at ESPN's morning crown. The bet? That the audience who loved her style on First Take would follow her, dragging a big slice of ESPN's loyal base along. And there's already precedent for this type of playbook. When Shannon Sharpe left ESPN for Fox Sports 1's Undisputed, he carried credibility and a chunk of the audience with him. When Skip Bayless jumped from ESPN to Fox Sports, he proved that high profile personalities could successfully transplant their following to a new network. But Molly Qerim's case is unique. She isn't just switching seats. She's being elevated from supporting act to headliner. Reports indicate she's intentionally pacing her decision, aiming for late October to maximize bargaining power and potentially spark even bigger offers. It's a calculated approach, showing she has absorbed the lessons of how the sports media machine works and is set on never letting herself be undervalued again. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive, keep the journey going by selecting one of the recommended videos on your screen now for more powerful stories and insights